Hey, everybody. I am Holly Michels, and I'm here to welcome you to today's reporting journey call from Montana Free Press. We're glad to have you here. I am the state editor for Montana Free Press, and today we're going to be talking about our Montana Insights polling project. Earlier this year, Montana Free Press worked with Rutgers University's Eagleton Center for Public Interest Polling to produce the first poll in our series of public interest polls that we're going to be doing together in coming months. So this first poll reached more than 900 Montanans in January and February to gauge how they feel about a wide variety of issues. And we have two people here who know way more about this project than me to discuss it. So I'm going to introduce them now. First person we're going to be talking with today is Zeke Lloyd. He's the Legislative Reporting Fellow for Montana Free Press. And then our special guest is Ashley Koning. She's the Director and Assistant Research Professor at Rutgers University's Eagleton Center for Public Interest Polling. So a little bit about how this event's going to run. I prepared some questions for Zeke and Ashley. So we're going to start there. Then we're going to move on to audience Q&A. If you want to submit a question, you can do so through the Q&A button on the right-hand side of your screen. So we're going to get started here. Kick it to Zeke if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, my name is Zeke Lloyd. So I actually originally am from Ohio, and I did undergrad in Colorado and then came up here in the summer to report on wildfires. And it's almost too easy, but I'll say it anyways, kept things hot and went right into the legislature. So I'm reporting on a lot of legislative issues, but this has been my main project here at Montana Free Press, and I've loved every day of it. So I helped set up the poll, organize the poll, coordinate the poll in conjunction with our friends over at Eagleton. So Ashley, I'll kick it to you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. And it's an honor to be here and to talk to all of you. And I hope by now Holly and Zeke consider me an honorary Montanan because I feel like I should be at this point. As Holly said, I am part of Rutgers University over in New Jersey. It's the State University of New Jersey. We actually are honored to have quite the legacy in terms of survey research, where we are the oldest statewide public polling operation at a university in the country. We've been around for over 50 years, and in fact, we were the first of our kind, and a bunch kind of sprang because of us around the country at different points. Academic centers are really special and unique in terms of what they do in the survey research industry, because obviously it is objective, non-biased, scientifically based survey work that we do. And so while we have our own public face within New Jersey, we actually do polling all around the country and in various different states, and really excited to be here and super, super excited about this collaboration.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys. I think we'll hop right into the questions that I've prepared for you. I think, Zeke, we're going to start with you. I want you to talk to us about why this poll is important to do. Like, why did Montana Free Press decide to take on this very massive project?
Yeah, and I was reflecting a lot on this, and it's hard to boil it down to something that'll fit here. But I think the easiest way that I really conceptualize the value of this, I got a new camera lens recently, and it's a lot longer than the camera lens I was using before. And it just, anytime I'm in the Capitol or anywhere doing any kind of reporting, just lets me see farther, and whether that's taking a photo or not, just gives that access to more information. And I really see the poll as a super parallel kind of feature for us at Montana Free Press. We're able to just get an understanding and feature that in our reporting in a way that we simply weren't before. So there's a whole new area that's now within our reach that we can talk about, write about, do analysis of. We have a lot of tools as reporters, whether that's interviews, reading through documents, and now we just have another thing in the toolbox there. And we're trying to use that in as many ways as we can.
That hits kind of at the next question I wanted to ask you, Zeke. Talk to me about, as a journalist, as you have this poll, as we have the results from the first round of this poll now, what's the value in that for you? What are you using that data for? What does it help you understand better?
Yeah. And I think what I've really loved about this poll, and Ashley can have thoughts on whether we maybe tried to put too much into this first poll. We had a really long, relative to other public opinion polls, it was a pretty long one. And we just really tried to put the kitchen sink in there. We really wanted to get satisfaction, I would say, is probably the big one that underscored pretty much every question. Is we want to know, hey, you live in Montana, how do you feel about a bunch of different parts of that experience? So how do you feel about how state government is handling this issue? How do you feel about how this issue is, whether it relates to state government or not? So just being able to say, okay, you have an experience in this state, and we just want a basic understanding of what that experience is like. And then when you start kind of piling that on with other reporting kind of tools, we're able to really build a much more complete picture. So saying, all right, well, we know that a vast majority, so we saw that I think it was about 70% of Montanans concerned about the cost of childcare. I mean, that's going to be step zero in a process that involves narratives, that involves a lot of financial research and reporting on what the impact of that is at kind of a fiscal level. So I would say it kind of points us in a direction and then adds to what we're talking about. But really, I think it's a foundational, just tell us what it's like to be here, whether that's politics, social, culture. We want to know everything so that we can really understand the concepts behind what makes someone a Montanan and what makes life in Montana life in Montana.
And similar question, but with a different end user in mind, I want to hear a little bit about why you think this poll is valuable for Montanans at large to be able to look at and really dig into the data.
So yeah, the easy one here is it's nonpartisan. And I think that so many, I mean, especially as a legislative reporter, I'm getting 3 or 4 emails, a week that say, hey, there's a poll that's been done, and guess what? It supports exactly what we wanted it to support. And I mean, that's great. I don't want to come after other polls. Like, all polls are good. But just knowing that there's a poll without an agenda that's being done about Montana issues where you can say, okay, I'm curious how people feel about this. I'm going to go to my trusted news source, and I know that they've talked to more than 900 Montanans, very statistically significant sample of Montanans about this issue. I think that's a huge value add for anyone who's even remotely curious about any of the broad range of issues that we talked about. I mean, the other thing is, and there are not many states that do a legislature every other. Sorry, I have a loud city road next to me. Believe it or not, in Helena, Montana, things get busier than you might expect. But we have a citizen legislature, so it meets every other year for about 4 months. Most of you probably already know that. It's not very common, and the philosophy behind it is pretty frequently challenged. I mean, citizen legislature in 2025 is a really tough thing to maintain. But what I love about our legislature is the fact that we're all pretty involved in politics and we're all pretty removed from politics. And I like that kind of duality of life in Montana. And I think this poll is trying to make our reporting a little bit more citizen oriented. We don't want to get too in the weeds of, oh, here's this nuanced political topic, and we asked, top lawmakers what they felt and special interest groups. I like this idea that a citizen legislature should inform the reporting process. We want to have a citizen press corps. And so this is a really important step in getting us closer to, okay, we really know what people are talking about. And so when our legislature meets every 2 years, we can give them a little bit of information about the citizens, their neighbors. I mean, Montana is, I believe, the 4th largest state in the country. We have over 1 million people. That's by size. We have over 1 million people, which makes us one of the smaller states in the country by population. So it's really hard to keep up with what people really care about. And it's easy to get caught up, especially as a legislative reporter, and all these big issues and these big figures who are talking about them. So I think it allows Montanans and allows us as reporters to take a step back.
Thanks, Zeke. Ashley, I'm going to you next. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what is unique in working with reporters, with journalists to develop this poll compared to other organizations that use Eagleton for polling.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, any organization that we work with is within our public interest mission, whether it's state government or a state agency, whether it's a nonprofit. But what I really love about the media relationship, and we work quite often with our own media sources out here in New Jersey. You guys are our favorite. Don't tell anybody. But what I really love and appreciate is, we're part of the same small d democratic process, right? We should be interconnected. I always like to think of it as this 4P process between the public, the press, the pollsters, and the policymakers. And in the words of George Gallup, and this is kind of my rose-colored view of surveys and polling, that polls make for a truer democracy. And who is the conduit that takes public opinion and the systematic study of public opinion and gives it to policymakers? The press. And what's even better is I feel like we achieved, unlocked yet another level where it's not only you're reporting on some data that a polling organization put out, the two of us are working on a relationship where we are producing this information together to a point where we are understanding the most pertinent issues in Montana. You are understanding the methodological design behind it and knowing how to properly report it. While we would like to think that all polls are good, the simple matter is they're not, right? There's actually a lot of non-credible polls out there. There are polls used for different reasons. There are partisan polls. There are polls for nefarious tendencies. There are polls that are not meaning to be so nefarious, but, maybe just not done well. And so this is just really a Herculean effort and an extraordinary endeavor in connecting polling and the press. And, like I've been saying to Holly and Zeke, I think also just a great representation of what we can do in the realm of data journalism. Like we, in terms of, the importance of, there are different forms of public opinion. There is the anecdotal, there is the in-depth, and that is the sweet spot and the expertise of the press. But there's also the scientific and the systematic. And I like to think polling is really that particular way of allowing all within a population to be represented. Even if we didn't call you or contact you, someone like you is very likely to have given their opinions in this survey. And we can generalize these results because it was done in a scientific way. We can generalize these results back to the population at hand. And really, this is the only kind of measure of our small d democratic process where you don't need time, you don't need money as a resident, but your voice is still being heard and it's being represented the way in which it's represented in the population. So there's something very feel-goody about us being able to join forces, understand one another, and kind of take both of our arts to the next level.
Awesome. If I can on that, and that's an experience we had people reach out and say, I got this request to do a poll for Montana Free Press. Is that you guys? And I think that was a really cool moment because it happened much more often than maybe you would expect for the size of Montana. So yeah, there really was that intimate connection, both with I think the people we talked to and the communities we talked to, but then I also want to echo, I feel like we've really been able to just collaborate in a way that has made me so much more, content and satisfied and just joyful. I would have expected.
I love that a poll makes you joyful. See,
maybe I'm the only one. Maybe me and Ashley are the only two.
Ashley, I'm wondering if you can talk about something that is really interesting to me about this poll. I've covered politics for a while in Montana. I've written about polls, and I'm pretty sure every poll I've written about is a survey of likely voters. But this poll that we did looks at the general population. Can you walk us through the differences between general population polling and likely voter polling, and just talk to us a little about why they're different?
Yeah, of course. I mean, this was a big challenge when we started this collaboration in terms of you really don't have any general population surveys there in Montana that have been publicly released. Anything that is public has been during an election cycle of registered and, like Holly said, most likely voters that are being talked about. And there's a really, really big difference here between all of those populations. This is something that comes up every election cycle. So, pre-election polling has a place and a time, and there is a lot of debate about that. And unfortunately, that debate bleeds into what we're known for and what we do, which is issue polling. Issue polling is very different from pre-election polling. When we're talking about pre-election polling, we're talking about looking at registered or likely voters. And let's realize registered voters we do know because they're part of a voter database that we can actually go to that database and get the information on those voters from. But we don't know who likely voters are. And I think this has hopefully been an educational moment in the past few election cycles of realizing what polls are and are not, what they should and should not be. You know, likely voters are an unknown population. We don't know until after Election Day who actually turned out. So any pollster is giving you their best educated guess to who they think is going to turn out in any certain election. And there's no singular formula or secret sauce that every pollster uses. There is a lot of subjectivity. I like to call it, there's a lot of art behind the science of polling. There are a million different subjective decisions according to best practices, but subjective nonetheless, that a pollster has to make until you see those final numbers. And when we see that 51, 49%, or whatever a head-to-head may be, that's all well and good. It shouldn't even be used to predict what's happening in an election. It should be telling you really how close a race is or how close it's not. Understanding there's like this inherent statistical uncertainty underlying those results. But again, that's all about election stuff. As Zeke said before, we want to hear from Montanans about Montana life and lifestyles and what people are going through. And frankly, you know, I think, and Zeke and Holly can correct me if I'm wrong, but, you know, you have a notable percentage here in the public that are not registered to vote, Indigenous populations within the state, hard to reach populations within the state. And so having even a registered voter survey, when we do know who registered voters are, is unfair to that portion of the population who policy also affects. They may not be registered to vote, maybe they can't register to vote, but policy nevertheless affects them. And so I always like to think in this ideal, again, you know, I'm a hopeless romantic for democracy, in this ideal way that policymakers should be doing what's best for the people writ large, just not for the people voting for them. Now, of course, that gets very twisted in reality, but I think there is incredible value in us knowing what the general population of any state or of the whole country thinks. And we do know who that general population is. Unlike likely voters, much like registered voters, we know who is in the general population of a state. And so it's not an unknown. It's not really a guess. And I think it makes it that much more important to be able to poll everybody and instead of just certain segments of the population. And we know that there are differences between registered voters and the general population in terms of demographic makeup.
You kind of hit a little bit on what I wanted to ask you next, Ashley, but I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about the challenges of polling in a state like Montana. Like Zeke mentioned earlier, low population, very spread out, a lot of rural areas that are hard to reach. We also have Indigenous populations in the state. Talk to me a little bit about how you go about putting the poll in the field, ways you try to reach people, how you account for that. Maybe we can't reach everybody. What does that look like?
Yeah, those are great questions, you know, and I think there are many challenges facing the survey research industry right now. And of course, some challenges that were unique to Montana. We did an oversample of non-white residents, but, you know, we found very quickly that really on a general population survey where you're maybe talking to 1,000 people total, no matter how big your population may be, if you're talking to only 1,000 people, if you have small percentages of certain subgroups, these are going to be tiny counts of people when you're actually analyzing them. And then you're unable to really make, statistically confident judgments about those groups, if those results would actually hold if we applied them to the general population. So I would say, you know, in terms of uniqueness to Montana, certainly a much smaller non-white population, certainly an Indigenous population, small yet incredibly notable. And so trying to use a blunt scientific instrument like polling, where we're only talking to 1,000 people, you know, we had to really strive to build up those numbers and do what's called an oversample. So we had to specifically make sure to talk to some of those subgroups so that we could, enlighten the data by understanding what those subgroups felt with a level of statistical confidence, when we interpreted the results. And I would also say something that's not just applicable to Montana, but really applicable nationwide. We've seen a significant non-response bias among Republicans, and there's been an issue of not just the quantity of Republicans in a survey, but obviously the quality, meaning, polls have become, unfortunately, very politicized, and they should not be. And so polls have become kind of a politicized institution, and that makes certain subgroups less likely to answer polls than others. And so we implemented measures to correct for that bias and to model partisanship of the state at the general population level. Obviously, that looks different if we're talking about registered or likely voters, but again, this was a general population survey. And so, that's a challenge, though, that we're seeing across the country and in every state. So, I think there were certain challenges unique to Montana, certain challenges that are just throughout the industry, permeating the industry. And I would say, we used a mixture of texting to recruit people and pushing them to the web to take the survey online, and phone calling. But obviously, there are multiple modes that you can do a survey in. Again, all of these things are determined by how much time we have and how much budget we have. So polling is a very expensive business. And so, we tried to do the most cost and time efficient model that is adhering to those gold standards of the industry, but also making sure it's practical and a reality.
I'm wondering, Ashley, something that came up as you were talking about that the non-response bias, is that a new phenomenon, or is that something we've seen in through past cycles? Has that come up before, or is that sort of new territory for pollsters?
Yes and no. So we've always seen non-response bias to some extent among certain subgroups. When we take a random sample of a population that's under study, people are always going to be more likely to answer than others. We usually see women are more likely than men to answer, older more likely than younger, white more than non-white, more highly educated, civically engaged, politically interested. But when we typically have weighted the data, and this applies to any pollster, a lot of that stuff has washed out. We also have not seen non-response bias so far between those who respond to a survey and those who do not. There have been extensive studies by Pew Research Center that have showed that. I think we're in a slightly different era right now, from 2016 onward, in terms of this systematic non-response bias. And I think that's a really big question in the industry right now, but that's why you've seen such progression in what pollsters have been doing for almost the past 10 years now. I can't believe it's 9 years and counting. But essentially, now weighting to education, we see deep, significant divides between non-college educated and college educated. Now even weighting to partisanship. This was a big thing in 2024, weighting data to known partisan parameters. What's difficult, of course, about Montana is this is not a requirement in your voter database. We had to build a model from existing data to model that partisanship and to make that a benchmark or a population parameter that we could also weight to in the survey to make sure we have equal distribution. And weighting doesn't mean anybody's getting more of an opinion or more say than anybody else. It just means we're leveling out everybody to where they are in the actual population.
Awesome. Thank you. So this next question I want to pose to both of you, and I'm really interested in the answer because this project started before I came on here at Montana Free Press, so I didn't get to play a role in this, but talk to me about how Montana Free Press and Eagleton worked together to decide what to ask in this first poll. I know, Zeke, you mentioned earlier it covered a ton of topics, but there's always more we could ask. And I know that there was some culling to get it down to what ended up in the poll. So maybe, Zeke, if you want to kick us off, talk to me about, from Montana Free Press's side, how we decided what made the cut and what didn't.
Yeah, and I got to say, Ashley has a really elite team, and part of that is just kind of a workhorse ethic because, we sent them, and I should have double-checked this number, but I bet it was close to 40 or 50 articles, and you all are Montana Free Press readers, so we don't keep those things very short. And so we kind of just sent that over, and I feel like it was a rite of passage to just kind of say, this is the stuff that our reporters have been talking about. But then, like I said at the beginning, I think a lot of what we wanted to find in the poll was, what are we not talking about? What have we not written about that is worth kind of hearing? So, childcare, housing, general affordability, these are the things that we feel like we heard from our neighbors, and we said, these are things that we really do want to know about. Education in general being a large one as well. So those were some of the areas where we said, well, let's put maybe a little bit more in terms of questions so that we can get maybe more detail and nuance in these areas. But I would say, a significant, a majority of the poll, we didn't try to predict necessarily what we thought would be, big issue areas. We kind of zoomed out and said, we want this to tell us what those are. So we informed our reporting based on that. And, even though our team of reporters might be up to a dozen now, even though it's only about a dozen, we still have a pretty broad range of stuff we've reported on outside of kind of assigned beats. So that initial start of, hey, let's just look at Montana Free Press reporting, I think was kind of the foundation that we wanted to build off of. But since then, we found a lot of other areas that we want to do more reporting on based on these general questions we put in the poll, or based on some more specific questions in areas that maybe we didn't even necessarily expect to be very important to Montanans. And then they told us those were significant areas.
Awesome. Ashley, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Zeke, and we had a love affair of Google Docs back and forth that were very, very large and barely downloadable. Our approach is usually, let's think of everything we want to ask and then narrow it down from there. And I think one of the most important things is, to me, this survey shows how much commonality we have, not just between your state and a state like New Jersey, but really across the entire country. Because I think a lot of this survey, I always like to call it a baseline survey. A lot of this is just getting a handle on Montanans' thoughts in issue areas that really can be applied nationwide or can be applied in other states. You guys have housing problems. We have housing problems and housing affordability. You're upset about the economy. We're upset about the economy. You're upset about childcare. So are we. So I think, the commonality is endearing to me and very notable, that these are measures that we should have in every state, that we should have across the country. The sad part is, and why Montana Free Press is so fortunate, and we are fortunate too, but why this collaboration is so important, because there is a real absence of statewide polling, and especially statewide issue polling. People only care when it's election time, and there are so many issues that don't get their day at the ballot box or may never get heard by policymakers if the public does not express them, if the media do not put them at the top of the agenda. And so I think something like this is so important, because, this is something we need to know everywhere. How people are doing, like, how are they suffering? What are their behaviors and attitudes? What are they excelling at? So I think a lot of the beauty in this initial collaboration was pinpointing those baseline questions to get a feel of, like, hey, Montanans, how are you doing?
If I can, sorry. I just love, Ashley, it's too easy. We've spent too much time together maybe. But I think to that point, and looking at the fact that this is only the first of several polls that we plan to do. And so keeping a lot of these questions, whether they're in a national context or a statewide question, but using this first poll as a way to inform what we ask about moving forward. And we want to have a set of baseline questions, and we're checking with people as we move forward in future polls that are likely to come later this year, although we're kind of figuring out our exact schedule now. But, we want to have a set of baseline questions. But the other thing is, we want to be talking about the issues that are important to people. So we want to use both this poll, but then also keep an ear to the ground as we frame future polls and figure out what to ask there.
I'm curious, Zeke and Ashley, if you have an answer to this too. What didn't make it in the poll? Like, what's the thing that's the biggest? You're like, oh, I wish that was in there. What's the one thing?
Yeah, this is tough to admit publicly. I mean, it's tough to admit even to myself. It's the generally environmental questions. Just, we just had to slash so many more than I think. I mean, so public land being a big one, public land access, especially in Montana. And then also kind of hunting, environmental regulations, and, in the legislature we have MIPA bills and, the held decision. So a lot of dialogue about this. And then the other thing, and this is one of the best parts of Montana, is that, any Montanan you talk to is passionate about, public land, or passionate about hunting, or passionate about hiking or biking or skiing. Like, pick a way that people have been able to engage with the environment around them, and Montanans have found a way to personalize that and really make that important to them. So I think that's an area, to me, it was a lot of tough decisions as we were finalizing these things, but that whole general environmental area, there are so many different questions and so many different avenues that we really could have hit on, and we had to cut a lot of that, but we have more polls, so please expect questions that area soon.
The last question I think I have time for that we prepared before we hop into questions from the audience is, and I think this is mostly for Ashley, I'm wondering if you can talk to me about how you craft questions like the way a pollster would. Like, I'm thinking, if I'm a journalist and I'm trying to gauge how someone feels about something, the way that I ask them that question is probably pretty tailored to the situation we're in. And it's not the same language that a poll uses. How do you guys decide how to pose the question to people to get the information we're after?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think, we always need to realize that when we see poll results, the poll results or the survey results are only as good as the question wording. And if you don't know what that question wording is, then you know nothing about the results and the data that you are seeing. And when you said that, Holly, it made me think, as a journalist, you're trying to kind of prod and pull out information at times, and we're kind of trying to do the exact opposite, because the interaction between survey interviewer and interviewee, or even the interaction of a respondent taking the survey on their own online, there is so much inherent subjectivity and so many variables that influence their experience. If it's on the phone, how does the person sound? Do they sound of a particular gender or race or ethnicity? Are they being pleasant and polite? Are they giving extra information that they shouldn't be giving? If they're taking it online, how are the response options formatted? What is the font? What is the color? Is it a really, easy thing to click through? Is it difficult for them to view on a phone, which most people are now taking surveys on a phone? So question order, question format, the response options, all of how a question is phrased, first and foremost, all of this impacts how people respond, right? It's a cognitive exercise where someone is being asked something, and the way in which you phrase that question is going to inform the way in which they answer it. And so, we obviously follow best methodological practices that have been countlessly studied, in the survey research literature and in academia, in terms of how to phrase questions. We make sure that they are balanced. We make sure that they are neutral. So, Holly, you might say something like, you might, as a good journalist, be like, well, did that make you feel such and such? Like, in trying to really pull an emotion or a piece of evidence out of somebody. For us, it's more like, did you feel anything, or did you feel it at all? Or, let me give you a scale to assess this, and making sure that responses are covering all bases, making sure that the question stem is not biased in either direction, not essentially leading the witness, and making sure that people feel comfortable to respond and not assuming what somebody may think, not framing the question in a particular way that might evoke a particular response. So there's a whole lot of intention that goes into questionnaire design and stuff behind the scenes that happens before the data are even collected.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for that. I think we're going to switch over to questions from the audience now. The first one, and this is just pretty basic nuts and bolts, so whoever wants to hop in there, but Jim from Hamilton was asking if the poll has been conducted, which yes, it has, but when was it conducted? And I'm going to expand on that a little bit, and if you can talk to us about sort of the things that we always want to look at when we report on polling, of how many people is reached, margin of error, all that good stuff that always is the fodder at the end of any good polling story.
Pass it to me.
Yeah.
So we contacted many Montanans. Our original sample, or what we would call a sample frame, is always much bigger than the resulting final sample itself. Response rates have precipitously dropped since 2016. Any survey researcher will tell you now, any pollster will tell you, people are now in the single digits in terms of response rate, low single digits. There are studies that show this through the Pew Research Center. So our resulting sample was made up of 919 Montanans, 18 plus. Our margin of error is plus or minus 4.1 percentage points. So that means that if we have a result like 50%, if we had talked to everybody within the population, which obviously is not practical, but let's say we did, then that number would end up somewhere within that band of 4.1, 50 plus 4.1 and 50 minus 4.1. So you'd have kind of that 8.2 band around 50%. So we're looking at anywhere from 54.1 all the way down to 45.9. And so the true population value would fall somewhere within that band 95 out of 100 times, because we use a 95% confidence interval. That's a lot of math, but the margin of error is very important to interpreting results, because, a lot of times, and we especially see this in pre-election times, 51-49, that person at 51 is totally winning. Not really, because if we take that margin of error into account, that tells us a very different story. If we say 51% say this, so it's a clear majority. Not really, because there's a margin of error of plus or minus something. So, like I said, we had 919 Montanans. The survey was fielded between January 24th to February 14th, Valentine's Day of this year. This was a random digit dial sample, which, if there's interest, I can also go into what that means. But essentially, this is a probability-based design, which is the gold standard of survey research, that everyone has an equal and known chance of being selected. Even if you are not being selected, someone like you is. 21% of completions were done through landline phone calling with a live interviewer. 79% were done through cell phone, the text invite to web. We had about even split with gender, 85% white, 15% non-white. And obviously key demographics that we have benchmarks for from the US Census, the resulting weighted sample matching those key demographics.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, our next question is from Susan in Polson. She asked, there seems to be a large divide nationally on key issues about the economy, public safety nets like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, and WIC, with urban voters more willing to support these initiatives and rural voters less likely. Do we see a similar divide in Montana? Zeke, I'm guessing if you want to start there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the urban-rural divide was a tough one for us to track down, because a lot of rural populations are so spread out throughout the state. So we didn't want to group together someone in southwestern rural Montana versus northeastern rural Montana. But thinking about the national economy, what was really interesting, the trend that we saw was that Democrats and Republicans felt very differently about the national economy. So if you look at how Democrats felt over the last 12 months, a lot of them feel like they're financially, over the last 5 years, Democrats felt that they were financially better off, and Republicans over the next 12 months anticipated that they would be financially better off. And then obviously the inverse. So Republicans think the last 5 years weren't that great for them, and Democrats are not very optimistic about the next 12 months. So it's a really interesting trend you point out, and I wish I could speak to those exact details more. But really what we saw was kind of that party line difference. And then rating the state economy, we did not see that difference as much. People on both sides of the aisle really felt very similarly about how the state economy was going.
Anything from you, Ashley, or?
No, I think that pretty much covers it.
Awesome. So the next one, I think we'll start with Zeke too. So Stephen Helena, the question he asked is, do the poll results point to continued deep red sentiment in Montana, which I'm sure is referencing elections of the last couple of years where Republicans won by large margins around the state? And Zeke, I might add to the
Yeah.
question? I'm wondering if you feel like if the poll gauges that at all, or if
Yeah.
it's not, given that this isn't sort of that horse race election poll we normally see.
It's an amazing question. And so, I am from Ohio originally, so I have my own kind of origins in a purple state that's now leaning red. And I really appreciate this question because the trend we found here, and one of the reasons that I absolutely adore my life as a reporter in Montana is it, and Ashley, I think, would be able to, well, at least helped me understand this really well, but it's really hard to track this idea of deep red or deep blue sentiment because Montanans are darn tricky to put in a political party. Looking across different topic issues that on a national scale would be pretty easy identifiers of, oh, you're a Republican or Democrat. I mean, those kinds of standards just do not work very well in Montana. You see a lot of people who are going to be very pro, they might, it would seem like they're very democratic based on their answer on environmental issues. But then when it comes to kind of state government spending, they're very against it, and so that would read as a little bit more red. So really, I would say the trend we saw is, yeah, on a lot of issues, there were places a lot of Montanans are not happy with how high taxes are, which I guess is a cross-party issue, but obviously is much more of a talking point for the Republican Party. And so that's absolutely a trend we saw. And so that would indicate that we have a lot of that kind of deep red sentiment. But then, obviously Montana had CI 128, and I don't know the numbers we saw on abortion off the top of my head, but really answers all over the place. And, Republicans were more likely to oppose abortion in most cases or all cases. But that trend was not particularly stark. And as we're kind of looking at across a lot of issues, we just didn't have a very easy time saying, oh, this person is deep red or this person is deep blue. Varied so much issue by issue, which is another reason we love these polls, because elections, you see Montana now, we have, statewide offices are all red. And so, that's a trend that it's easy to say, well, okay, Montana's going this Republican direction. And yeah, in a lot of ways, certainly in the ballot box, maybe people are, and that says something certainly about the way people feel. But this poll gives us the opportunity to really dig into that and maybe offer not necessarily a counter narrative, but a more nuanced narrative to that trend.
Zeke, I'm wondering, to follow up on that question, where did you see the least divide, if you know off the top of your head from looking at the data of questions that we asked, where were people who identified either Democrat or Republican kind of the most in agreement about something?
Everyone thinks things are too expensive. Everyone is finds the just a very high rate of unaffordability, and the trend. And this is something we asked. We kind of, to an earlier question, we knew potentially we anticipated would potentially be a high interest area for people, and we found that trend to be true. Housing affordability. And it's something that Gianforte has made a big deal about, as well as Democrats in both sides. I mean, anyone in the legislature on both sides of the aisle. So housing affordability, red, blue, doesn't matter. If everyone thinks it's a problem. We also asked about responsibility for housing affordability. So, for instance, who do you think is responsible for ensuring that people have a safe and affordable place to live, between the federal government, the state government? And I can't speak to the specific trends there, but we did see some differences there where Democrats across the board felt that government was going to be more responsible, or should be more responsible, for giving people, or providing, ensuring, that was the language used, ensuring that people have safe and affordable housing, while Republicans were a little bit more laissez-faire about it, and did not think that government would be quite as responsible, should be quite as responsible for that.
Awesome. Thanks. So next question is from Kathleen, don't know from where. Kathleen's asking if we asked respondents in the poll to identify with a political party, and then noting that the interpretations are broken out by party, says the demographics portion indicates 20% of participants identifying as independent. And do we have interpretations for independents, or did we group them into the results as leaning toward one party or another? So probably to you, Ashley.
Yeah, so and I think this also harkens back to the last question as well, and that kind of independent spirit of Montanans. And hey, I think this is also another thing that we really kind of have in common, right? A lot of states are like this. You may have an impression of us over here in the Northeast that we are incredibly liberal, and I want to dispel that for you and tell you we are also a very purple state. New Jerseyans hate their taxes. They think housing is unaffordable. They're unhappy with the economy. They are left of center when it comes to social issues. And so, we have this characterization of being a blue state over here because we've been going for the Democrats since the Clinton era in the 90s when it comes to the federal level. But we have Republican governors all the time, and we have Republican members of Congress. So it's not that uncommon. And I think, the commonality of that, I can kind of conjecture what's going on with Montana as well, as Zeke had pointed out. And in fact, when we looked at respondents and traced them back to the voter database, a significant number of respondents told us a different partisanship than they did in the voter database as what they are registered. Because when you're asked about partisanship in these surveys, sometimes it's a feeling. Sometimes you're too embarrassed to say what you're registered as, and you say something else. Like there are studies that show when your party is not doing well, you are less likely to affiliate with it. And so we especially see a lot of this movement between independents and Republicans. So yes, we did measure partisanship in the survey that was asked as a demographic. As I stated earlier, there's really not a general population benchmark for partisanship because of the way Montana structures its voter database data. So we had to model that based on state by state and national estimates from the Pew Research Center. And what we did with those independents in the middle, we did ask a follow-up question if they leaned one way or the other. So what you see in the resulting data are true independents who said they do not lean either way. They are pure independent versus Republicans plus leaners and Democrats plus leaners. And the very little available polling that we have seen in the past 10 years has very similar partisanship numbers for the general population.
I would love to also say so many thoughts on that, but Holly, can you check me on this? One of the Clinton elections was the last time Montana went blue for a president. So it's kind of an interesting versus New Jersey trend there. Oh, you can live check me there. Okay, great. And the other thing, to that question, and I love that question because this is exactly what we want the poll to do. And you kind of scooped me a little bit here because I, for a long time now, have been really wanting to dig into. So who is the Montana Independent? How do they kind of fit into trends or don't fit into these trends, and what do they believe? And so something I really, really wanted to write a story about it. We have 5 advisors on the project, but one of them, Desi Small Rodriguez, who's a sociology professor at UCLA, originally from Lame Deer, Montana. She kind of highlighted in some ways that it's tough that we try to put people into these categories, because I think Montana, a lot of what I'm hearing and seeing in the poll results is Montanans don't want to be put in one of these categories. And so I'm, stay posted because I really want to put together a piece on that and kind of highlight, here's what Montana independents are thinking. And here are these struggles that we had trying to put people into categories. And here's how we can think about people as not only voters, but citizens, residents of Montana, without trying to say, okay, you're blue or you're red.
Awesome. Nice. Next question, Monica in Missoula is asking, how do you reach out to people in non-biased ways, and what do you hope to gain from the poll? So I think maybe split there if Ashley takes the first part of that and Zeke on the second.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different kind of strategies and tricks that we can do. We did, both landlines and cell phones. Obviously, there are certain segments of the population. While most populations within the country are dominated by cell phone only households, obviously there is a different segment who is using, typically older, who is using those landline phones. So we made sure to be calling both. Again, this is a question of time and money, as most survey research is. And so There's postal mail that can be implemented. Face-to-face is exorbitant and nobody really does that anymore. But I mean, like there are multiple methods. The method that we thought best fit this baseline poll was to do the cell phone and landline split with a higher concentration on cell phones. We try to package the recruitment and the messaging as neutral as possible. We also incentivize respondents because incentives have been shown in the research to significantly work in recruiting people and persuading them to participate. So there are, and we're very generic that the survey is about Montana. So it doesn't stress that it's about any particular issue. It doesn't have any particular stigmatized or charged wording when somebody is clicking through that initial stuff in the survey. We also brand it as a research study. We are a research center. We are an academic center. This is research that is informing the public good. So there's a bunch of different things we do to try to make sure that we are hearing from everyone, and of course also multiple contact attempts for everyone who we initially set out to contact.
Awesome. Zeke, part 2.
Yeah, and it's such a big question, and there are so many different ways I want to answer it, but I think it's really about connecting to people, and I'll tie that into another really overused kind of sentiment of like, oh, people are so partisan these days, like our political world is getting so divided. And I feel like for me, this poll had a huge personal significance because I think as a reporter, the way that I've learned to connect with people is asking them questions and really trying to understand how someone ticks just by, inquiring about their life. And so what we hope to gain, is just a set of listening ears, because I think people just don't feel heard. And that's not necessarily a political phenomenon. And I think that's a big part of this poll. A lot of people don't want any more political phenomenons. People want to tell us we don't want to talk about politics right now. That's not what's significant to us. So I think this has been a good way, especially for Montana Free Press. We were an organization that really kind of centers around legislative reporting, political reporting, government reporting. I think a value of this poll is saying, all right, we're passionate about this. All three of us are huge government nerds and politics nerds, and we love that about ourselves. But I think this poll is deeper than saying, oh, so tell us how you feel about politics, because that's the same vein that horse race polls are getting at. We want to say, tell us what you think about life. Tell us what you think about what it means to have the life of an American, of a Montanan. And so I think we hope to gain a sense of, a fundamental connection to the people that we're talking to.
Awesome. And last question I want to sneak in here. John in Missoula is asking, is there a plan for follow-up polling to track changes in opinion? You talk to us about what's next.
Yeah, there absolutely is. We got 2 more coming down the pipe at the very least. So we got more where this came from. And I think that's a great point because, so many of, I think one of my biggest frustrations coming out of November, we have so much money and so many people pour into this state because all they want to do is get our vote, whether that's in a presidential election, a Senate election. There's just this lack of follow-up, right? We all saw the ads throughout the entire election season, and now all that money is gone. No one seems to kind of give that kind of attention. And many of us are grateful that we're now, saved from that kind of nonstop noise. But I think what I love, one of the most important parts of this project is that there is follow-up, is that we're not going anywhere, and we wouldn't want to. We love the work that we do. We love the opportunity to do this poll, and the just idea that we get to come back, and Ashley can speak more to this, but we're going to go back to the same people we asked the first time. We're going to say, so tell us maybe what's changed. Tell us how you feel about these other issues we didn't get to ask you about. And so I think that there's a little bit of intimacy there. Going back to the last question, there's a little bit of, we want to know, even removed from a legislative session, not just an election, but removed from a legislative session. We want to know what's going on. And so, we plan to change the questions, and that's an ongoing discussion, but we don't plan to change the ethos of the project.
Awesome. Ashley, anything to add from you there?
No, I'm just looking forward to more.
Awesome. Well, any closing thoughts from you guys? Any last parting things you want people to know about the poll?
Answer your phone if we call you or if we text you.
It's real. If you get a text that says we want to do a poll, this is not like a scam. We're really asking, and that's real data for us. So please
Say
respond.
someone in my own household was like, "Is this poll real?" And I had to say, "Yes, yes, it is."
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody who joined us today. Hope this was informative and helpful. And if you got more questions, Zeke and I, you can find us on Montana Free Press's website. Feel free to shoot us a note. We can filter things through to Ashley if we can't answer them, but would love to keep the conversation going if there's other questions. And also wanted to encourage people, if you like projects like this, if you like Montana Free Press's reporting, you can become a member and help support coverage like this so we can keep continuing to do this work. So thanks again to everybody and hope to see you guys out there answering our polls. And yeah, see you all later.
Thank you both. This was awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.